You think Pepsi is a soda company. That is the single biggest lie they have ever sold you. In 1989, a soda brand briefly owned a naval fleet larger than most countries on Earth. 17 Soviet submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, a destroyer, a soda company with warships. What if I told you that PepsiCo, the company behind that bag of Doritos in your hands right now, does not actually compete with Coca-Cola? What if the real war they are fighting has nothing to do with flavor? What if it is a war for control of every single shelf in every single grocery store on the planet? And right now, in 2026, the city of San Francisco has taken PepsiCo to court. And so has a teenager from Pennsylvania whose lawyer is using the exact same legal strategy that destroyed Big Tobacco. Not for contamination, not for fraud, for engineering their food to be impossible to stop eating. Like Big Tobacco, but for snacks. Today we are going inside the machine, the financial architecture that generates $94 billion a year, the scandals they buried, the monopoly tactics that are completely legal but should shock you, the failures they have never fully answered for, and the one technological bet that will either save this company or expose how desperate they actually are. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never look at a bag of chips the same way again. Before we go any further, if this is your first time on Strategy Lens, we do this every time. We take massive corporations, strip away the PR, and show you exactly what is happening behind the numbers. Hit subscribe right now. One click. No algorithm games, just real analysis every time. Let's go. Most people think PepsiCo's story starts with the cola war against Coca-Cola. That is the headline version. The real version is far more interesting and far darker. It starts in 1898. A pharmacist in North Carolina named Caleb Bradham creates a drink he calls Brad's Drink, later renamed Pepsi Cola. He patents it. He builds a small bottling operation. And then, twice, the company goes bankrupt. Once in 1923, once again in 1931. So the company that is worth $205 billion today died twice before it was 30 years old. The real turning point was 1965. Not a product, a merger. PepsiCo merged with Frito-Lay, the snack company behind Lay's, Doritos, and Cheetos. And that single decision changed the entire strategic logic of the company. Here is what most people miss. That merger was not about flavor. It was about distribution. Frito-Lay already had a nationwide network of trucks delivering snacks directly to store shelves. PepsiCo saw that network and realized something nobody else in the industry had fully understood yet. Whoever owns the shelf owns the consumer. That insight, combined with 3 more decades of acquisitions, is how PepsiCo became what it is today. Tropicana in 1998, Quaker Oats, and with it, Gatorade in 2001, SodaStream in 2018, Rockstar Energy in 2020, and most recently, Poppy in 2025. Each acquisition is a chess move, not for taste, for shelf space, for distribution rights, for category ownership. The year is 1959, the American National Exhibition in Moscow. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev is standing in front of American products on display, a propaganda exercise to show what capitalism looks like. And someone hands him a cup of Pepsi. He drinks it, in front of cameras, in front of Richard Nixon, and in that single moment, captured in photographs seen around the world, Pepsi becomes the first American consumer product to penetrate the Iron Curtain. Coca-Cola refused to enter the Soviet market. They did not want the political complexity. But Pepsi saw it differently. For the next 2 decades, PepsiCo sold cola syrup to the Soviet Union and got paid in Stolichnaya vodka, which they then sold in the United States. Cola for vodka, East for West, a private company running its own Cold War trade route. But then the Soviet economy started collapsing. The ruble was worthless. They still needed Pepsi. They had built 16 bottling plants by 1985. So they offered the only thing they had, military hardware. In 1989, PepsiCo acquired 17 Soviet submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer, On paper, a soda company briefly held a naval fleet that would have ranked among the world's largest. One executive reportedly joked, "We are disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." They sold the ships for scrap to a Norwegian company. They never intended to keep them. But the audacity of that transaction tells you everything about how PepsiCo operates. They will go anywhere, do anything, and they will find an angle nobody else has thought of. That mentality built an empire, and it also created some of the worst disasters in corporate history. Let's talk about how PepsiCo actually dominates its industry, because this is the part that most people, including most investors, completely misunderstand. You probably think PepsiCo's main competitor is Coca-Cola. In beverages, yes, but in the broader picture, PepsiCo's real competitive advantage has nothing to do with what is inside the can. It is about what happens between the factory and your hand. The direct store delivery system. When you walk into a Walmart or a Kroger, the snacks you see on those shelves were not put there by the store. They were put there by a PepsiCo employee, a route driver who woke up at 4 a.m., loaded a truck with Doritos and Lays and Cheetos, drove to that specific store, walked past the stockroom, and placed every single bag exactly where PepsiCo wants it. That is not logistics. That is control. Here is the economics of why this matters. PepsiCo controls the visual real estate of the snack aisle. They decide which products are at eye level, which ones get the end cap display, which in retail drives 30 to 40% more sales just from placement alone. Which products sit on the bottom shelf where nobody ever looks. And if you are a new health food startup trying to break into that aisle, congratulations. You are competing against a company with thousands of trucks, thousands of drivers, and 50 years of retailer relationships. You would need billions just to build the distribution infrastructure that PepsiCo already owns. Category captaincy, the legal monopoly nobody talks about. PepsiCo acts as what the industry calls a category captain at major retailers. This means that when Walmart is designing their snack aisle, which products go where, how much space each brand gets, how the section is laid out, they actually ask PepsiCo for advice. PepsiCo, the company selling products in that aisle, is advising the retailer on how to design the aisle using their own consumer data, their own purchase analytics, their own demand forecasting. This is completely legal and it is brilliant. And it means a small competitor cannot just make a better chip. They cannot get the shelf. They cannot get the data. They cannot get the relationship. The game is rigged, not through criminal conspiracy, but through decades of scale advantages that have calcified into structural barriers. Why they never price war? The Nash equilibrium. In beverages, PepsiCo and Coca-Cola operate a duopoly locked in place by exclusive pouring rights contracts at stadiums, universities, and restaurant chains. But here is the deeper thing most people miss. PepsiCo and Coca-Cola do not engage in destructive price wars, and the reason is one of the most important concepts in business strategy. Economists call it a Nash equilibrium in a repeated game. Neither player gains by changing their strategy unilaterally. Both companies have learned through decades of market experience that mutual high pricing benefits the duopoly far more than winning a price war that destroys both their margins. If Pepsi cuts prices aggressively, Coke matches within weeks, and both companies destroy their margins for zero net gain in market share. So neither moves. This rational equilibrium is why PepsiCo maintains gross margins above 54% despite selling what is fundamentally water, corn, and potatoes. The Nash equilibrium with Coca-Cola is arguably worth more to PepsiCo than any single brand in their portfolio. And here is the transferable insight. Anytime you see two dominant companies in the same industry not competing on price, this is what you are looking at. It happens in banking, in telecom, in airlines. Once you recognize it, you see it everywhere. The activist inflection point. But this machine started breaking down. When inflation hit in 2022, PepsiCo raised prices aggressively. A bag of Doritos went from $3.99 to nearly $7 in some markets. Revenue numbers looked great. but volume, the actual number of units being purchased, went negative. By late 2025, Elliott Investment Management took a $4 billion stake in PepsiCo. They came in with one message: fix it or we will. What happened next tells you exactly what kind of company PepsiCo is in 2026. Now we need to talk about a pattern. Not individual disasters, a pattern. Because when you look at every major PepsiCo failure, all of them, they share the same root cause. And once I show you what that root cause is, you will be able to identify it in every acquisition heavy company you will ever analyze. The Quaker Oats contamination, December 2023. The FDA issues a massive voluntary recall. More than 60 Quaker Oats products, chewy bars, cereals, granola, pulled from shelves across North America. Reason? Salmonella contamination. Traced to the Danville, Illinois manufacturing facility. PepsiCo did not fix the facility. They permanently shut it down. A company earning $94 billion a year let a factory degrade past the point of viable repair. Metal and labeling failures. In 2017, consumers in Michigan reported a metallic taste in bottled beverages. Investigation revealed particles of iron and chromium suspended directly in the liquid, the result of degraded wet process machinery that had not been maintained to schedule. And in 2024 and 2025, multiple recalls were issued for products mislabeled as zero sugar when they actually contained full sugar formulations. Mug root beer, Lipton green tea products. For a diabetic consumer managing insulin levels, that is not a minor inconvenience. That is a medical emergency in a bag. The Philippines number fever disaster, 1992. The year is 1992. The Philippines. PepsiCo runs a promotional campaign called Pepsi Number Fever. The concept? Bottle caps with numbers. Match the winning number, win cash. Up to 1 million pesos. Sales explode. Then a computer error announces the wrong winning number, 349. 800,000 bottle caps printed with the number 349 were already in circulation. 800,000 people believed they had won. PepsiCo offered consolation payments of 500 pesos, about $18. People who thought they had won millions received $18. The response unfolded over months. PepsiCo trucks were firebombed, distribution facilities attacked. In separate incidents across the country, multiple people died and hundreds were injured. A promotional error that escalated into a national public safety crisis. One campaign, run by a $90 billion company that cost lives. Legal proceedings lasted years. The Supreme Court of the Philippines ultimately ruled PepsiCo had no legal obligation to honor the 349 caps. But the reputational damage in one of their fastest growing markets was permanent. The Kendall Jenner ad 2017, an advertisement that co-opted the imagery of Black Lives Matter protests. A model handing a police officer a Pepsi can as a symbol of unity, pulled within 24 hours. The damage? The revelation that PepsiCo's marketing team looked at civil rights protests and thought, let's sell cola, permanently shifted how a generation views this brand. Now here is what connects every single failure. Because they are not random, they all come from the same structural problem, the acquisition integration trap. When a company grows primarily through acquisitions, as PepsiCo has for 60 years, it inherits dozens of different factory systems, different safety protocols, different maintenance cultures. Integrating all of that is expensive and unglamorous work. It does not show up in quarterly earnings. It does not get announced at investor days. So it gets deprioritized every year until a factory fails. The Danville Quaker Oats facility was not a PepsiCo facility. It was acquired with Quaker Oats in 2001. For 23 years, the safety and maintenance culture of that factory was never fully integrated into PepsiCo standards, and eventually the factory failed. This is the hidden cost of the acquisition machine. Every time PepsiCo buys a company, they inherit its infrastructure, and the bigger the empire gets, the harder it becomes to govern every piece of it to the same standard. Apply this framework to any company. Amazon after its warehouse acquisition wave, any bank after a merger. The ones that thrive invest aggressively in integration infrastructure, even when it is boring. The ones that fail assume the acquisition magic transfers automatically. That is the real lesson. Not just PepsiCo, every company you will ever analyze. Now we need to talk about what PepsiCo's products are actually doing to the human body. Not as a health lecture, but as a business risk analysis. Because in 2026, this is the single biggest legal and strategic threat to everything they have built. The Bliss Point Science. There is a term used inside the food industry, the bliss point. It refers to the precise combination of sugar, salt, and fat in a product that triggers the maximum pleasure response in the human brain, while simultaneously suppressing the natural satiety signals that would normally tell you to stop eating. The key mechanism with high fructose corn syrup is not that it bypasses the body entirely. It is that fructose, consumed in excess and at speed, is metabolized in the liver faster than the body can register satiety. Your gut hormones, GLP-1, peptide YY, lag behind. You have already finished the second can before the full signal arrives. The seed oils used extensively in Frito-Lay snacks, particularly linoleic acid, oxidize at the temperatures required in chip manufacturing. That oxidation produces inflammatory compounds increasingly linked to metabolic syndrome and systemic inflammation. High fructose corn syrup. Fructose metabolized faster than satiety hormones can signal fullness, encourages overconsumption. Business risk. GLP-1 drugs suppress exactly this pattern, 80% of portfolio at risk. Seed oils, linoleic acid, oxidizes at frying temps, produces inflammatory compounds linked to metabolic syndrome. Business risk, growing consumer awareness, regulatory risk expanding in EU and globally. Ultra-processed emulsifiers, disrupts gut microbiome, erodes intestinal lining in multiple animal studies. Business risk, UPF classification now covers approximately 80% of PepsiCo's total portfolio. The lawsuits. Both real, both named, both on record. This is not a future risk. This is happening right now. And there are two separate legal actions you need to understand. Case 1. Martinez versus Kraft Heinz et al. Filed December 10, 2024 in the US District Court for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. A 148-page complaint filed on behalf of Bryce Martinez, a Pennsylvania teenager who developed type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at age 16. The lawsuit names PepsiCo, Kraft Heinz, Coca-Cola, General Mills, Nestle, Mondelez, and others. The allegation? These companies scientifically engineered ultra-processed foods to be addictive and then targeted children with those products. The complaint argues they took a page directly out of the tobacco industry's playbook. A judge dismissed the initial filing in August 2025, but noted the court is deeply concerned about the practices used to create and market UPFs and the deleterious effect UPFs have on children and the American diet. Lawyers are working to reinstate the case with corrected filings. The legal theory is alive. Case 2. City of San Francisco versus PepsiCo et al. Filed December 2, 2025 in San Francisco Superior Court by City Attorney David Chu. This is the first government lawsuit of its kind. It names PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Kraft Heinz, General Mills, Nestle, Mondelez, and others. The San Francisco City Attorney stated, these companies created a public health crisis with the engineering and marketing of ultra-processed foods. They took food and made it unrecognizable and harmful to the human body. This is not about consumers making better choices. David Chu, San Francisco City Attorney, December 2025. Together, these two cases establish something critical. The legal theory that food companies engineered addiction and marketed it to children is now being tested in US courts at both the individual and government level. PepsiCo's own internal research into bliss points, flavor optimization, and repeat purchase behavior modeling is now potential evidence in both proceedings. The GLP-1 disruption. Ozempic, Wegovy, the weight loss drugs rewriting everything about how humans interact with food. GLP-1 receptor agonists mimic the gut hormones that signal satiety, specifically suppressing cravings for high carbohydrate, high fat, ultra-processed foods. exactly the foods that make up 80% of PepsiCo's product portfolio. As GLP-1 adoption accelerates, with projections showing hundreds of millions of users globally by 2030, the addressable market for ultra-processed snacks could contract in ways that no pricing strategy, no distribution advantage, and no marketing campaign can reverse. Because the drugs are literally reprogramming the neurochemical patterns that PepsiCo's entire snack portfolio depends on. PepsiCo has responded. They acquired Poppy, prebiotic soda. They acquired Siete, better for you snacks. They launched Doritos NKD and Cheetos NKD, removing artificial ingredients. But the fundamental nutritional architecture of their core products has not changed. You can rebrand a Dorito, you cannot make it a health food. Now, here is the part of this story that almost nobody in business media is covering, and it is arguably the most important thing PepsiCo is doing in 2026. Because while everyone is watching their soda volumes and their lawsuit exposure, they are quietly making one of the most ambitious manufacturing technology bets in the entire consumer goods industry. January 2026, Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. PepsiCo announces an industry-first multi-year partnership with Siemens and NVIDIA. What a digital twin actually is. Every major PepsiCo facility in the United States is being replicated in perfect three-dimensional detail inside a simulation platform built on NVIDIA Omniverse. Every conveyor belt, every robotic arm, every pallet route, every operator walking path, the temperature of the fryers, the speed of the filling lines. Then they deploy AI agents, autonomous software programs through these digital replicas. The agents simulate thousands of operational scenarios. They identify bottlenecks before they occur in real life. They test new equipment configurations without shutting down production. They model contamination risk points before a factory degrades. That last capability is not a coincidence. If PepsiCo had applied this technology to the Danville Quaker Oats facility a decade earlier, simulating the hygiene degradation pathway before it became a salmonella crisis, that recall might never have happened. The same technology that saves money can save lives. Early 2026 pilot results. 20% increase in manufacturing throughput. Faster production, meaningfully lower per unit cost. 10 to 15% reduction in capital expenditure. Billions in freed capital for portfolio transformation. 90% of bottlenecks identified pre-build. Fewer costly real-world failures and shutdowns. NVIDIA Omniverse plus Siemens platform. Industry-first implementation in the CPG category. The AWS real-time cloud integration. Simultaneously, PepsiCo is integrating deeply with Amazon Web Services to build a cloud-first real-time data architecture. The goal, the moment a product is placed on a shelf or pulled off one faster than expected, that signal flows back to the manufacturing floor automatically. No human in the loop, no weekly report, just data flowing in real time, adjusting production continuously. Is technology alone going to save the company? No. It cannot reverse health trends. It cannot resolve the lawsuits. It cannot make GLP-1 users crave Doritos again. But here is the strategic logic. If PepsiCo reduces manufacturing costs by 15% through digital twins, they free up the capital to fund the portfolio transformation the market is demanding. The technology bet is the financial engine that makes the rest of the strategy possible. Let's talk about the numbers. All of these figures come directly from PepsiCo's 8K and 10Q filings with the SEC in April 2026. This is not analyst speculation. This is what the company reported under oath. Q1 2026 results verified from SEC filings. Net revenue $19.44 billion, up 8.5%. Beat consensus estimate. Markets relieved. Organic revenue growth positive 2.6%. First positive quarter after consecutive negative readings. Core EPS $1.61, up 9%. Beat consensus forecast. Cost discipline paying off. Operating profit $3.213 billion, up 24%. Operating margin expanded to 16.5%. Quarterly dividend $1.48 per share, up 4%. 54th consecutive annual increase. Cash and equivalents $10.55 billion. Liquidity healthy. The revenue illusion of 2022 to 2024. For 3 years, PepsiCo grew revenue almost entirely through price increases, not volume growth, selling roughly the same number of units at significantly higher prices. And for a while, that works. But volume, the actual number of units being purchased, went negative. North American beverage volumes fell approximately 4% in late 2025. Frito-Lay saw consecutive quarters of volume decline for the first time in years. This is when Elliott entered with $4 billion and an ultimatum, the Elliott correction. Elliott's thesis was precise: SKU bloat. Thousands of flavor variations clogging manufacturing lines and fragmenting marketing budgets without proportional revenue benefit. PepsiCo's response for 2026: eliminated approximately 20% of US product offerings. Hundreds of variants discontinued. Cut prices up to 15% on core Frito-Lay brands, Lay's, Doritos, Tostitos. Accepted lower unit margins in exchange for recovering lost volume. Simplified manufacturing lines around the highest velocity core brands. The dividend streak, why it matters beyond the yield. 54 consecutive years of dividend increases, confirmed in the 2026 proxy statement. $1.48 per share per quarter. $5.92 annualized, yield of approximately 4% at current prices. And here is the investor insight most people miss. A company that has protected this streak through multiple recessions, an inflation crisis, activist pressure, and a salmonella recall will make certain operating decisions specifically to protect it. Understanding that dynamic tells you how PepsiCo's leadership behaves under pressure. The dividend streak is not just a return metric, it is a behavioral constraint on management. The tariff contradiction. Section 232. Tariffs on imported aluminum are creating a 65 to 70 basis point headwind on core operating margins. PepsiCo is responding by substituting aluminum packaging with PET plastic. But that substitution directly conflicts with their PEP plus sustainability commitments, which target reductions in virgin plastic use. When business pressure and sustainability commitments collide, the sustainability commitments lose every time. Now let's talk about the things buried in PepsiCo's supply chain disclosures, SEC proxy filings, and federal legal proceedings. Because the machine we described earlier, the one that controls every shelf, has a beginning. And the beginning is darker than most people realize. The palm oil supply chain, the specific documented case. PepsiCo is one of the world's largest consumers of palm oil, used in Frito-Lay snacks for texture and shelf stability. Indonesia and Malaysia account for nearly 85% of global palm oil supply. And in these regions, the documented labor situation is severe. Here is a specific case, on record, in US federal trade documents. Sime Darby Plantation, one of the world's largest palm oil producers and a supplier in PepsiCo's supply chain, was subjected to a US Customs and Border Protection withhold release order in 2020. CBP found reasonable indicators of forced labor conditions, including debt bondage and restrictions on workers' freedom of movement. Migrant workers, primarily from Bangladesh, Nepal, and Indonesia, arrive in Malaysia having paid recruitment fees of up to $10,000 to labor brokers. Their wages are then garnished to repay those fees over years they can never fully clear. They cannot leave. They cannot refuse overtime. The debt resets faster than they can pay it. This is documented in US federal trade records. Not a rumor, not a social media claim, a formal government finding. And it is in the supply chain of the company that makes your Doritos. PepsiCo publishes a sustainable sourcing policy. They describe their audit program in annual reports. But in shareholder advocacy filings reviewed for 2026, a pointed question was raised. What percentage of your Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 suppliers have actually been audited against your human rights standards? And what were the findings? PepsiCo did not answer the question. They described the program. They did not disclose the results. There is a very significant difference between those two things. The India sugarcane connection. In Maharashtra, India, PepsiCo's largest international franchisee, Varun Beverages, has been linked to sugarcane suppliers where seasonal migrant workers arrive under advance cash payment arrangements that create debt obligations lasting an entire cutting season. The New York Times documented these practices. PepsiCo confirmed the supply chain relationship exists. No structural corrective action has been publicly disclosed. This is not a developing world problem that large companies can disclaim. Varun Beverages is publicly listed. PepsiCo holds commercial relationships that give them direct leverage over supplier practices. They choose not to use it. The Walmart pricing story with legal context. FTC complaints and internal communications disclosed during legal proceedings revealed that PepsiCo had engaged in promotional pricing practices, providing Walmart with substantially more favorable terms than independent grocers. The Robinson-Patman Act of 1936 prohibits price discrimination that materially disadvantages smaller buyers. Disclosed internal emails showed PepsiCo employees explicitly tracking the price differential between Walmart and competitor retailers to ensure Walmart's advantage was maintained within specific parameters. The cases were contested and some dismissed on procedural grounds, but the internal behavior documented in those proceedings reveals where PepsiCo's loyalty actually sits. Walmart represents approximately 14% of PepsiCo's total revenue. When one customer is 14% of your entire business, the power dynamic inverts. PepsiCo does not set terms with Walmart, they negotiate survival. And every independent grocer who cannot match Walmart's terms loses the shelf competition, which concentrates the monopoly further. Every piece of this connects. The distribution mode, the retailer relationships, the pricing dynamics, the supply chain opacity. They are all part of the same machine, and the machine was built to win, regardless of what it costs at the edges. So where does all of this leave us? I promised you at the beginning we would be neutral, not a hit piece, not a press release. Because PepsiCo is neither the villain it is sometimes portrayed as, nor the consumer-friendly icon it markets itself to be. It is something more interesting than either. It is a $205 billion machine that has been doing one thing for 60 years, getting its products closer to the consumer than any competitor can match. The strengths are real. The direct store delivery network is one of the most valuable pieces of infrastructure in the global consumer goods industry. Replicating it would require billions and decades. 54 consecutive years of dividend increases, confirmed in 2026 proxy filings. A level of cash flow discipline almost no other corporation in the world can claim. Gatorade alone represents one of the most dominant brand moats in sports nutrition. International growth in India, Brazil, Latin America, and Africa represents a genuine long-term volume runway that many analysts significantly undervalue. These markets are less exposed to GLP-1 adoption and more insulated from the health backlash. The NVIDIA/Siemens digital twin technology, if execution matches the early pilot data, could simultaneously free billions in capital for portfolio transformation and prevent the next quality crisis before it happens. The flaws are also real. The Danville Quaker Oats facility was not an accident. It was the result of 23 years of deferred integration after acquisition. A company earning $94 billion a year let a factory rot. The pricing hubris of 2022 to 2024 was a strategic error still being paid for in 2026. Raising prices into a cost of living crisis reflects a leadership team too focused on quarterly earnings. Two lawsuits, one from a teenager, one from the city of San Francisco, are now testing the legal theory that PepsiCo engineered addiction. Publishing a global human rights due diligence framework while refusing to disclose audit coverage rates is not transparency. It is branding. Sustainability targets revised downward when they became inconvenient. The plastic versus aluminum contradiction. These are not isolated governance failures. They are a pattern that erodes the credibility of every future ESG commitment, and investors are starting to notice. What PepsiCo should actually do. First, accelerate genuine portfolio reformulation. not by labeling a Dorito NKD, by actually reducing sodium, replacing seed oils, cutting added sugars, even if it requires accepting short-term flavor trade-offs. The cost of inaction will far exceed the cost of reformulation. This is not a wellness trend, this is an existential trajectory. Second, invest in supply chain transparency with disclosed outcomes. Actual third-party audit results with coverage rates, findings, and corrective action timelines published annually. The same Dabia documentation exists. The Varun Beverages relationship exists. Acknowledge them publicly, correct them structurally, and build the audit infrastructure that actually governs the supply chain. Third, apply the digital twin technology to quality and safety first, efficiency second. If you can simulate a factory to find throughput bottlenecks, you can simulate it to find contamination risk points and hygiene degradation pathways. The same technology investment that prevents the next Quaker Oats crisis protects margins at the same time. Fourth, get ahead of the hyper-palatability litigation. The legal framework is established. The science is accumulating. The government is now a plaintiff. The companies that proactively disclose their formulation research, commit to reducing engineered palatability, and engage constructively with regulators will face lower long-term liability than the ones fighting every case to the last appeal. PepsiCo is not a company that is failing. It is a company at a genuine inflection point. The decisions made in the next 3 to 5 years will determine whether it remains a durable $200 billion institution or begins the slow decline that every empire eventually faces. The machine is powerful, but the world it was built for is changing faster than the machine can adapt. So let's bring this home. You came into this video thinking Pepsi was a soda company. I hope you are leaving it understanding something different. PepsiCo is a logistics empire built on shelf space control and distribution density that happen to get attached to some of the most psychologically compelling food products ever engineered. They built a moat that took 60 years and hundreds of billions of dollars to construct, and that moat is real. But a moat only works if the city inside it is healthy, and PepsiCo's internal city, its quality control infrastructure, its supply chain ethics, its relationship with the consumers whose health depends on what they eat and drink, has been underfunded for decades, while the moat kept expanding. The submarine story? That is PepsiCo at their boldest. The Quaker Oats contamination? That is PepsiCo at their worst. The digital twin technology? That is PepsiCo at their most interesting. The San Francisco lawsuit? That is the world finally catching up. PepsiCo proves one uncomfortable truth about modern capitalism. You do not have to make people healthier to build a $200 billion company. You just have to be closer to them than anyone else. The question is whether that truth has an expiry date, and whether the GLP-1 drugs, the courtrooms, the supply chain scrutiny, and 2 generations of consumers reading ingredient labels are finally writing it. If you learned something today that genuinely changed how you see one of the world's largest companies, that is the goal. That is Strategy Lens. We go inside the machine. We find the things nobody is talking about, and we hand you the information you need to think for yourself. SpaceX, our next video. We are going inside a company that has done something no government and no corporation in human history has ever done before. They have made rocket science affordable. They have built a private satellite network larger than everything else in orbit combined. They have signed contracts with the United States military that give a single private citizen infrastructure control over critical global communication systems. And they are currently building a rocket designed to carry humans to Mars. Investors call it the most important company of the 21st century. Critics call it the most dangerous concentration of private power in modern history. The numbers and the truth are more complex than either side wants to admit. SpaceX, the empire Elon built. Is it the future of civilization or the greatest risk hiding in plain sight? Subscribe, turn on notifications. We will see you there.